Hey guys, just want to preface this video by letting you know this one's sort of a long one. So if you're just interested in my initial thoughts on the tier 10 Italian TD, I believe, the Minotauro, just skip to about 47 minutes. About from 45 to about 47 minutes, the video does freeze. However, it does pick right back up to that. Nothing's wrong with your computer, so enjoy. Hey everyone, Mish here. This time, given that the 1.18 release video just came out, I'm going to do a review watching this video, but I'm going to focus on the competitive gameplay. I'm not going to focus on vehicle changes that don't have to do with tier 6, tier 8 skirmishes, tier 10 advances, or clan wars. It will be mainly focusing on all of the changes that have to do with the competitive gameplay. So I'm going to be rolling right through the other changes. If you have any questions about that or my opinion, let me know and I'm happy to answer them. But I don't want to make this a 45-minute video, and that's the main focus that I am doing with this video. So let's start from the beginning. Obviously, I'm going to pause it as I need to discuss things, but everything else I'll just roll through.
There will be a lot of new changes in Update 1.18. Players can expect a brand new map and a number of improvements to well-known locations, as well as important adjustments to familiar tanks and a completely new branch of vehicles. And you can try it all out on the common test. Learn more about it in this quick video.
Okay, I see the Kranwagen changes, the 54 changes.
After a short break, we've gotten back to work on vehicle balance. Remember, these test parameters may change.
Yeah, but they probably won't.
At the moment, the Kranwagen and Emil 2 are performing too well in battle.
Yep.
So we've decided to make them a little less intimidating, while still keeping their shtick, their sturdy turret and magazine.
Right, and I've released a video about this as well.
The Kranwagen will be slower.
Alright, so I already did a review here. I believe I did a replay feature, and I spoke about some of these changes, but we'll go over it again. Obviously, it's going from 60 to 45. This means that it's not going to be able to keep up with 277's IS7s. Not that we were using it that way anyway. Reverse speed is down to 12 kilometers an hour. Obviously, you'll probably be running a turbo on this vehicle anyway. Possibly, we'll see. That'll boost it up to 14. It doesn't need an 18 kilometer an hour reverse speed. The turret is impenetrable, and nothing's going to pen it anyway. Dispersion, this is a bit of a kick. However, this vehicle wasn't a sniper. It was shooting at very close to medium short ranges. It really wasn't sniping. Chieftains are the ones doing it. This is the one that is just bursting tanks that are getting too close. Remember, all of this is my opinion when it comes to advances and clan wars. I'm not talking about random battles here. Obviously, that's going to be a real pain when it comes to randoms, because that's just horrible inaccuracy. Dispersion, again, not great, but most of the time the tanks are just sitting right in front of you. Reload time up 3.5 seconds. Honestly, it's not too big of a deal. And the DPM is just because of that reload. A lot of the time with the Kranwagen, you don't always have things to shoot at. Enemies are not just flooding in front of you unless it's a hard push. So let's finish that
We've
off.
decreased its top forward and reverse speed to make it more of a trench vehicle.
Yep. And I just want to talk about that. That's the only way we were really using this vehicle anyway. The only time the Kranwagen was pushing was in very rare circumstances, and I can't remember the last time I actually called for that, if ever, or when we've just won the game. Most of the time it's sitting with the chief.
Gun handling is now less comfortable, and the magazine takes longer to reload. This will make the tank less forgiving of mistakes. The Emil 2 has undergone similar changes.
We're not even going to be talking about this, but you're welcome to look at
the tank has now lost some of its dynamics and gun stats. The performance of the French heavy tanks with the cyclic guns has lagged slightly behind the competition. Now, with the upcoming changes, it will be easier for them to survive on the battlefield. This applies to all tiers except Tier 9. The AMX M4 MLE 51 has been competitive from the start, so only small changes have been made to its characteristics. However, the Tier 10 tank has undergone dramatic changes. The vehicle's sides are now thicker, and its HP is higher. The stabilization and penetration of both guns have been improved.
Alright, this is a tank, Tier 10, French heavy obviously, that I really wanted to make work. It's got fantastic frontal armor. It's got a gun that hits for 600. The main issue is the side armor was terrible. It had horrible weak points. The turret was so massive that if you turned it around, you could end up, it would stick out behind walls, all sorts of things. But the major issue was that the premium pen on the 130 was only 280. It's got up to 296. Unfortunately, it needs to be 30 millimeters higher for this to even be viable. And unfortunately, it just isn't good enough of a vehicle. The best way to play this vehicle, I believe, is with 120 millimeter. But the problem is then you just have a chieftain that isn't as good. This tank stands so tall. I hate the spinning wheel of death there. The 85 millimeters of sidearm is good because it can side scrape now. And the dispersion at 0.33 is much better. It's possible that we experiment with it, but this is just killer. I mean, this is a city vehicle. It will not be used for anything else really other than the city. Maybe we try it out on a ridgeline, on El Haluf or something, because the hull armor is so good, and I believe it has 10 degrees of gun depression. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. It's 10 or 8. But it just fills a gap that isn't there when it comes to competitive gameplay. I may test this vehicle out, but if it gets called for whatever reason and we try it, don't expect to be bringing more than 2 of them ever. The 2400 hit points is nice. I mean, that was one of the other things holding it back. You've got a really heavily armored vehicle. I think it has almost 300 millimeters just frontal hull armor. I don't even want to get started on the turret. But it only had 2200 hit points. And the 85 side armor is really nice because before this thing could be overmatched. And now I really don't think it can. I don't remember. Hull traverse speed, who cares? Shell velocity, who cares? It's a short range tank. This is going to be controversial. I know a lot of people don't really like this vehicle. However, I am always for trying out new tanks, as much as my lineups tend to be very generic. I like to call for specific vehicles for certain roles, and I would love to find a way to make this vehicle work. But
the standard shells for the 120mm gun and the special shells for the 130mm now offer better penetration. At the same time, the hull traverse speed has been slightly decreased.
Yeah.
For the Tier 8 AMX 65T, gun dispersion, durability, and crossing capacity have all increased.
Okay, I know we don't play a lot of Tier 8 skirmishes. This tank is not going to be used. I can tell you that right now. Don't even bother. If you're thinking about getting the 65T for whatever reason because of this buff, I would highly recommend against it. It's not a keeper. It's making the vehicle go from terrible to playable.
It will also be easier for the Tier 7 vehicle to play on the front line, thanks to its improved frontal turret armor and increased hit points. Moreover, the stats of the entire main branch of American heavy tanks have changed. The only exception is the T110 E5,
we don't really call for this vehicle
which has shown decent performance since the last rebalance. The M103 is now slightly less maneuverable, but its hit points and gun stabilization have improved. The T32...
We don't play this vehicle in Tier 8. It's not a good one. The only time you would want to bring this is just if you're grinding it and you want to get some extra XP. Same with that 65T. It's just if we're playing skirmishes and the caller lets you bring it so that you can grind some XP so that we can get up. But it's not going to be a called for vehicle.
Will hit and penetrate easier. Also the M3 Stuart, T6 Medium, T1 Heavy, and M6.
Alright, M6. This thing is going to be a least when it comes to Tier 6 skirmishes. I believe that this thing may roll over T-3045Ms. Honestly. The thing has got an insane reload. I believe it has over 2,000 DPM now. Well over. 1,070 hit points. It's got a 90mm gun with 2 seconds aim time that's going to hit for 240 with a 7-second reload. I believe that it's going to be a fantastic vehicle to use. I wouldn't be surprised to see a bunch of these things rolling around the Tier 6. I believe this is now the deadliest Tier 6 tank in the game. Just with that reload time and the aim time there. And it having, I believe, a couple hundred more hit points than that 3045M. And the 10 meters view range isn't hurting it at all. Same with the reverse speed. I mean, 12 kilometers an hour reverse speed means this thing is just going to fire a shot out and just be able to back right around a corner. Or prevent a medium tank, such as the 3045M, to be able to circle it as easily.
All been given a boost.
And a turbo is only going to help.
On the other hand, the T29 now takes longer to aim, load, and traverse. The M44, an American Tier 6 SPG, will cause less damage. Now the differences between the Tier 6...
I know that this is a Tier 6, but it isn't... You don't play already in Tier 6s anyway. Maybe the caller lets you bring it so that you can grind to the T92. I don't know. I wouldn't pay too much attention to this if we're thinking in the competitive mindset. But it's here.
Its Tier 7 counterpart will be much more evident. A number of other mid-tier vehicles have also been rebalanced. The characteristics of the KV-1S, M4A3E8 Sherman, Type 58, TVP VTU, and 2 French tank destroyers will improve.
Okay.
Many of these vehicles...
The TVP VTU, again, it's going to fall in the same boat as the 65T. The EZ8 is getting buffed. But again, all of these are non-premium tanks, and unfortunately, other than the M6, most of the tanks played at Tier 6 and Tier 8 are premiums. Think Type 64 at Tier 6. Cromwell B, T3045M. I do believe the M6 will be called for a lot. I'm going to be playing Tier 6s coming up, well, when I get back, obviously, and bringing M6 mediums. I myself am going to pick one up. I have not even touched the American Heavy line. I don't even think I have the M4 Sherman. All of those tanks, the Tier 8 French tank destroyer, not going to be used very often. But again, this video is just focusing on how this update impacts competitive and team play, not individual play.
Vehicles are already popular among newcomers, which will help make their game journey smoother. At the same time, several mid-tier...
Alright, let's look from left to right here. Not a Tier 6, not a Tier 6, not a Tier 6, not a Tier 6, not a Tier 6. T25. Go to T25. That is a good vehicle for Tier 6. I believe it's getting a pretty big nerf. If it wasn't called for before, it definitely won't be called for now. I do think it's retaining its 3-round autoloader. However, I believe the gun handling and the reload are going down the toilet. I think the reload's the big one. It used to be 10 seconds, now it's going to be 12, 13, 14, something like that. I don't think they tell us the changes in here, but it's all on the website. And I believe that one on the far right is the 50 TP prototype, or maybe that's the premium. I think it's the Tier 8 equivalent. Not called for. Again, it's not a premium tank, and it's a Tier 8, so it's probably not going to be played in Tier 8 skirmishes. But I digress.
Vehicles have lost some of their performance, and for the sake of consistency, we've made a few changes to other vehicles as well. You can read more about these changes in the article.
Alright, so we can kind of see there. We have this go to T25. Yep, nerf. Boogie, we don't call for it. Nerf. That's the only thing in there. KV-1S, don't call for it. Doesn't matter. Sherman, I mean, maybe sometimes. Type 58, we don't call for it. It's just a bad T3045M. TVP VTU, we didn't call for it before. We probably won't. I can only remember seeing a TVP VTU in one Tier 8 ever. AMX AC48, don't call for it. We don't bring it. But, you know, you are welcome to check them out yourself if you're looking for the stats for them specifically. They're on there.
game portal.
Alright.
The winning map from Recon Mission Season 1 is ready to enter random battles.
Oh, no. And ready to enter random battles. This thing is not going to be a skirmish map, an advanced map, a Clan Wars map anytime soon. We don't see maps like this very often in Clan Wars anyway, so this is going to be a random map, but we're going to play through it anyway.
Meet the outpost. On this map, you'll be forced to fight nose-to-nose in the town while tanking to your heart's content. Or you can choose to fight for the fortress on the hill. It's a risky ascent, but if successful, you'll have control over a significant part of the map. Further on in the swamps, you'll be able to easily set up ambushes and fight in fast vehicles. The old battlefields have also received some attention.
Alright, this stuff will be important, because all of these maps here, or at least a good chunk of them, are Clan Wars and Advanced maps. So we're going to go through each one, and whether they're going to impact, and how they'll impact, and how this may change call.
Update 1.18 features a number of changes to existing maps. On Moravanka, the left flank has significantly improved. Small hills and buildings.
Let's take a look here if you can see my mouse. We often use to sneak tanks up this fast area. This means that we are going to be able to push into these gaps and cover this. This area is going to be incredibly difficult, and I smell a stalemate, especially if you have tanks sitting on this back ridge. I believe more teams are going to be playing either up front here. I don't think teams are going to be rushing as much because there's too many layers of fire. You can now rush tanks up to this gap instead of having to sit them back there. And now there's 2 layers, especially with tanks back in this area. We have houses in here now. This is going to be a mess. There's a lot of hard cover. It doesn't look like any of these buildings they added are destructible. So it'll be interesting to see how we play this area. I don't fully know, other than it's going to be much easier to defend and hold this area. At the same time, however, you may be able to push into these gaps and encroach before getting ready to push. It all depends on how much stuff they have. The hill, do you have control of the middle? Because if you don't have the control of the middle, the enemies will just back onto this ridgeline and farm you as you go across. This is one that I'll have to look around in a training room because there's quite a lot to look at. Divot, and I assume there's probably one on the other side, and these 2 buildings. But we'll have to look.
Things now provide much more cover. This part of the map has become more welcoming.
There we go. Yep, so we have this little hill here. I don't remember if this is here before.
Welcoming for slow, heavily armored.
Let's see. So it looks like we have a little ridge in the middle. There's one here, but look at the amount of houses. These were all destructible before. You could just drive through most of this. Not the case anymore. There's also bushes here for light tanks, for tanks that just hide out before they get spotted. This house wasn't here. This means that anybody who pushes into this gap isn't going to be able to just spot everything on the opposite corner.
With vehicles. In the encounter battle mode, location of the base has also been changed. This will balance both teams' ability to control the area. In Berlin, changes to the urban area.
Alright, so I believe this is a Clan War map. However, I don't have enough experience with it. I haven't actually called any battles on this.
Aim to strengthen the position of the right team. The balcony in square C6 has been reworked. This has been done to match the balcony on the opposite side.
It just looks like they're evening it out here. Can't be a bad thing.
In addition, the map has been removed from encounter battles. The changes in Redshire aim to balance the sides in favour of the upper team. The passage to the airship is now...
Yeah, so this was an incredibly annoying item here. The hill behind me, you could rush mediums up there if you spawn from the south, and then an EBR running through the river here would light up everything crossing, and you would just get absolutely hammered. It was incredibly frustrating, and trying to rotate back was a nightmare. It basically meant you were stuck on the blimp, and the only way out was pushing towards their path.
Better protected against fire from other directions.
Okay, so this is a great change, however, it may have some unforeseen implications. One of which is from that area that they showed us previously. You can kind of see it here, sort of, we were able to shoot the cap circle. Now, I don't know how steep this ridge is. So how many degrees of gun depression are you going to need to work this new ridge line? I'm not sure. It looks steep. If it's as steep as it is on this side, it looks like you may really have to expose yourself. Maybe it flattens out up there, but you're going to be protected. However, it may be more difficult to shoot tanks coming through the middle. A lot of teams would like to shove tanks through the riverbed, and this actually would work out because you had plenty of little dips and ridges that you could poke your tank out behind to gain access to that. It's an improvement going up to the blimp. I don't know what else this is going to cause. Again, I need to see this for myself. This is a very low angle here, and it's hard to tell how steep this ridge is, but let's continue.
It's now much safer for scouts to depart from D6.
Okay. Very common spot here. However, in the competitive gameplay, often you don't bring passive lights, you're bringing EBRs. And the issue with that is if you stick a passive light in here, in random battles, great. The problem is that in competitive play, people will run EBRs through the riverbed, and they're actually below the line of sight of whatever passive scout is in there. That means that if that EBR runs up, he's going to spot that light tank, and given that it's an EBR, it's going to be able to get out, but this light tank is going to be caught in here, and with chieftains mounted on this ridgeline in the back, possibly even by the blimp, and on the reverse side, there's all sorts of tanks up here, it's very unlikely that that light tank will survive. So I don't see this being a viable position. It's possible you could stick a light tank over in this corner of the bushes, and that might work out. But I believe that this will not impact too much. Often an EBR can sit passive in this too and still light that up. That ridgeline isn't too far away, maybe 200 meters.
The assault mode has been updated in favor of defense. The base and spawn points of both teams have shifted. Pearl River has also become more balanced. When playing from...
Maybe a Clan Wars map. It's not an advanced map. It might be a skirmish map. I'm not sure, but nothing big here.
The lower spawn point, players can now get to the central passage faster, and the passage itself has become wider. There's also a new, well-defended position here.
Okay, if this does become it may be a Clan Wars map, but if this does ever become a map, this is going to be a great spot to stick a 705A, something, maybe even a mouse. I don't know if you can get a mouse up there, and maybe some chieftains behind it. It'll be very interesting. My guess is this would just become a stalemate, but let's push on.
The terrain on Siegfried Line has been changed slightly. Now the hill in square A7 is flatter.
Not a competitive
Moreover,
map.
the assault mode base and spawn points have moved a bit. On Lakeville, one of the most popular positions for light tanks has been improved. Now you can spot enemies in the center from one side of the house.
Alright. This is a nice change here. Often light tanks would have to push up a little bit further towards where my mouse is, past that point, to really be able to spot. I still do believe that this bush on our left of the house is going to be the better area to spot, and the main reason is this bush right here. If you get lit for whatever reason, you're going to have to back up all the way behind the house and then over to the right. This bush aligns with that back right corner, meaning that you can work back and forth over here rather than up and down, because if you stay back here, let's say, and you can keep this bush opaque, you're going to lose all the vision on the right side of that house because the house is in the way. But if you're up here and you get lit, you're going to be shot at by everything in the middle, which is not going to work. You're going to have to back up all the way and then over to the right, and it's going to be a mess. This spot right here, you can effectively spot the middle where the enemy light tank is running. You can also work out a little bit further and spot the center road. However, you don't need to risk, or you won't expose yourself for nearly as long as you would on this side if you do get lit. My personal take, I still believe we're going to be pushing light tanks up further, but, and again, if we're using EBRs, this spot won't really matter that much at all. But
house, and in the city from the other. The central hill in the canyon has become easily...
Okay, so actually we can kind of see here what it used to be like. So on a lot of strategies we would use from this north spawn, you could just stick an EBR up here.
Accessible from...
Yeah, you could just stick an EBR up here and it could spot anything coming valley. You would have a great amount of heads up time because you'd see them as soon as they just tried to push into the valley at all. Now what'll happen is that EBR will be able to get those initial lights. However, if the EBR is the only thing over here and it's just acting as a tripwire, and an enemy chieftain decides to kick that tank out, the EBR is going to have no choice but to leave, which means we're going to lose about 50% of our reaction time. If a chieftain's up there, forget it. An EBR is not going to be able to spot this. It just isn't. What'll happen is the EBR will have to be back on those mound of rocks over to the right, and he'll be able to spot tanks coming over the top, but not tanks as they approach this center ridge. This will be a great spot here. Whoever can get up to this area, a skilled chieftain player will be able to absolutely ruin everybody on this side. I don't know if you can shoot over these rocks somehow, but they will provide you cover. So that's a pretty massive change here. It's going to benefit the south spawn, I believe it is, but it's going to damage this north spawn here. Before, this was just a easy area to just farm from where to get spots.
Both spawn points. On Corellia, selective improvements have been made to the shapes and positions of several boulders. This will secure flanking from the upper base.
Okay, I don't really see major changes here. EBRs are really the only ones that use those rocks, so you guys will have to take a look for yourself and see if these changes really make any massive difference. Most of the times they're just used, these rocks are just used for EBRs who are damaged and need to, get the repair kit up, or are trying to go in lit, maybe trying to poke out and snipe the enemy EBR, sometimes even a medium, but these changes don't look that drastic.
Ghost Town. Players in heavy vehicles will feel the most significant improvements here. The major clash area is now covered against long-range fire. Tank destroyers that used to camp far from the center of events should look for new positions. Note that this change will affect players on both sides.
Alright. Ghost Town is a Tier 6 and Tier 8 skirmish map. It is not in the advanced queue. These changes are interesting, however, the area they were talking about with the building on the opposite side is over there. Here's the main hill you can see in the background. The only place a tank destroyer is going to be playing, or a sniper in Tier 8s or Tier 6s, is from this hill. And they're not going to be playing in that back corner, therefore these changes do not impact competitive play. Same with this side. You're not sticking vehicles in that back corner behind the rock. They're going to be over past my mouse on the right side in that sniper hill. Furthermore, these buildings here, the only time that this may cause issues, let's say, is that if maybe you've pushed Tier 6 tanks down the right side and you maybe have gotten tanks behind them, this house may block you again from shooting tanks here, but most of the time it's just one big dogfight on one flank or in the center, so not too much here.
The Paris map now features a new terrace in the corner of a house in square H7. This will make
not a competitive map, I don't believe. I haven't played on it, correct me if I'm wrong though.
It harder for enemies in E3 to hit vehicles crossing the street. On Glacier, the path to the...
Okay, just a personal note here. I used to love this spot. Well, I still do, but now they're changing it. You could just sit behind that rock and get about 2,000, sometimes 3,000 damage in a high DPM medium, basically before the game had even started. So, but again, that's a random battle comment, so let's just move on.
The aircraft carrier has become much safer, and there is now more cover in both spawn areas. Artillery from the lower base is now able to assist allies on serpentine roads. This has been updated to match the conditions on the other side. On the Abbey map, there's no longer...
Okay. We used to boost all the time here. Getting 3 chieftains up from this side was just a cakewalk, and meant that you basically secure the Abbey from the east spawn.
Look at the option to hoist up in.
Yeah, so you can see they've boosted, or they've increased the height. It looks like you can still drop off on this area, but unfortunately what this means is now you're going to have to go up the middle road. However, this side still has the advantage. Because the road is wider on this side, you're able to hug the left side of the road, the center road obviously, and therefore you don't expose as much of your tank to maybe whatever E3 or Sturv is sitting on the opposite ridge. So still an advantage, not a huge deal. That just means that we're going to have to be careful going up that middle road. We will still be taking middle regardless of this. We never really got flawless at this. Sometimes tanks would fall on top of each other and then you would be down a couple hundred health each. But this just secures that the fact that we're not going to do that anymore.
E5. On El Haluf, changes have been made to square A1. Previously, only the upper team could comfortably play.
Alright. Big change here. So before, what we would do is the south team would push tanks all the way up to here, and you'd grab like an IS-7 in this spot, and then you would be able to shoot all the way down. The other team, basically what they would have to do is they would come up this road here, trying not to get shot as they crossed, and then they would just pretty much hold this area. Maybe if the enemy didn't take it, they could side scrape, but it was basically getting here to try and stop an enemy tank from sitting on that corner. What this means now is that this is going to be a huge area of contention. However, I still believe that the advantage goes to the, again, I can't remember which team it is. It's the South Spawn team? Anyway, the one that had this rock before. And I'll explain why. So, let's look at the layout of these rocks. It's not exactly equal still. If this team here gets this rock, it's not going to be just one vehicle. They're going to have a couple of tanks supporting, but where are those tanks going to sit? Because they can't sit over on this side because they'll get shot across. What they'll have to do is they'll have to sit back here sort of around the corner, and that means that if this tank on the rock gets pushed, the tanks over here are not going to be easily able to support. However, let's look at the other side. Let's pretend that this 60 TP was shooting across this rock. His teammates are going to be sitting right on this side, right behind him, not around the corner. So they're going to be able to effectively halt a push coming around the back side here much more easily than this team will against a push coming from this side. I know it's a little bit more confusing. So I still believe the advantage goes to the South Spawn team, or the team that originally had that rock, but I do think this is a great change. I really like it, and sticking something like a 60 TP with an impenetrable turret, you could still stick a 277 there. Obviously, it's going to have to be 277s who come up here. Is going to be much more of a threat for the South team, and I believe that there's going to end up being a dogfight here, and it's going to be whoever brings more heavies is going to win this side, and we'll start sacrificing tanks from the opposite area. So, but sort of, I wouldn't say a minor change. I'd say this is actually pretty major. But we'll see how this pans out. I'm very curious to see how teams play this, and whether this is an area of contention or teams decide to just bypass it, or are we just going to rush one tank in there and then hope for the best. But moving on.
Hold down here. Now, thanks to the new boulder, the position benefits both sides equally.
Well, not equally.
The updates to Serene Coast are minor, but still positive. In the past, if you fell into the water, it was impossible to get out. This has now changed.
Okay, well, I've seen tanks be drowned here. There we go. I've seen tanks be drowned right around this area. We'll shove tanks off of it. I haven't seen anybody fall into the water. And normally, because we're not working this area, unless we're in a big dogfight, most of the time we're working out here. And you can make your way into the water a little bit, but not too much.
But still positive. In the past, if you fell into the water, it was impossible to get out. This has now changed. And finally, Himmelsdorf.
Okay.
The castle and surrounding terrain are now more symmetrical. This way, the upper team will be as comfortable here as the lower team. Moreover, it's now easier to move and play hull down in squares.
Okay. So on the opposite side, there is a little bit of a gully, and that means that the opposite team can defend very easily against a push coming through. This area right here, the way I believe this is going to end up being played in Clan Wars and Advances is you'll just stick a bunch of chieftains in here to stop the opposite side, and then push a whole bunch of tanks up against the rubble mound on the road side of the castle. That means that these chieftains will be able to, 4 or 5 chieftains can effectively hold off against a good chunk of vehicles, at least until they get completely overwhelmed, and the high side will be able to effectively win that, while the lower side is getting pushed. So, great change here. This area was just a flat mess, and it meant if you got pushed, you'd have a whole, just kind of a free-for-all going, and no real advantage to being over here, especially if we brought chieftains. There was no way for them to really be hull down on this side of the map.
E9 to E9. The new Italian tank destroyers will also feel comfortable tanking here, but more on that later.
Yep.
For now, let's talk about the Matchmaker.
Okay, this does not have to do with any sort of competitive gameplay, so I'm just going to play through this.
To improve your battle experience, we're introducing some new rules for balancing light tanks and artillery. First of all, there are new restrictions to balance the number of light-tracked and wheeled vehicles. The Matchmaker will now be stricter when balancing light tanks between teams, and will always aim to put the same number of these vehicles on each team. This means that there will be far fewer battles between teams with uneven numbers of light tanks. Wheeled vehicles will now be more strictly balanced as well, and there will be a limit of 1 wheeled tank per team. To support these changes and avoid a significant increase in waiting time for light tanks in a platoon, we are also introducing a limit of no more than 1 light tank in a platoon from Tier 7 onward. We're still experimenting with these restrictions, so our developers will be keeping a close eye on the Matchmaker's stability, queue fluctuations, and waiting times, then make any necessary adjustments. The second important change concerns the number of SPGs per team. The majority of battles will now have 0 to 2 SPGs per team. Starting with update 1.18, the Matchmaker will aim to keep the number of battles with 3 SPGs per team to an absolute minimum. The number of battles with 3 SPGs will greatly depend on the time of day and day of the week, as well as the number of artillery players waiting in the queue, among other things. Nevertheless, the Matchmaker will always try to limit the number of SPGs on a team to 1 or 2, or none at all. If you're having trouble finding your way around the maps, try the updated scenarios in...
Okay. Well, this may not seem relevant to competitive gameplay. It absolutely is. Oftentimes, Advances, Clan Wars, you're in 1v1s, and learning new positions on certain maps is only going to help you. You may be somebody who's only ever played an E3 on Ruinberg, for example, here, and you're not really playing the zero line. This is a great way for you to learn new spots, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in a second.
Topography. The vehicle routes and target positions are now even more consistent with the realities of random battles. Learn to play smart.
Alright, right here. Just in this video, I did not realize that this was a hold down area. I really didn't. And now that I know that this is a hold down area, I plan on putting tanks here on Ruinberg, because it looks like you can spot across and hold this corner. You don't necessarily need to stick tanks here that have to overexpose themselves. Not only that, you can shoot down on their front plate. So, I will be playing all of these. Even if, you know, everybody should get at least one thing out of this if you play it, honestly. It cannot hurt. It really can't. This also shows you where enemies can shoot you from certain positions. I think this is a useful tool. Do with it what you like, but I personally will be using these to help understand the map better for myself and for calls.
With topography. If you're a total newbie, be sure to try out Tank Academy right after completing the initial tutorial.
Yep. So, This is going to be great, especially for people, let's say, in Class X, Class 4, Class Z. If you don't have a good selection of Tier 8s, this could be a great way for you to get 2 weeks of rental so that you're able to play some of the upper end Tier 8 premiums, which will get you more credits and just allow you to participate in those Tier 8s. The 7032 is probably the strongest vehicle on this list here. The TS5 really isn't called for, but the CS would be a nice addition as well. I'd recommend this. I don't know how many battles you can have played to actually be able to do Tank Academy. If it's available to all players, obviously I will be completing it. I'll take 14 days of rental. Maybe it just gives me time to experiment with some Tier 8 premiums, kind of understand their weaknesses, how they play, and maybe whether I want to pick one up or not.
Tutorial. This series of missions will gradually introduce you to the various features.
Looks like there's some decent rewards in here too. Lots of directives, credits, consumables, some camos.
Of the random battles gameplay. And best of all, you'll get useful rewards. We've made some visual changes that will bring together.
This has nothing to do with competitive play, but I love it, personally. Maybe one of my favorite things this update.
The overall tone of the improvements in a number of ways. Now, destroying the tracks on any tank in the game will look as impressive as it does on the Yo tanks.
Just look how cool that is.
The tracks work as a separate physical model. They react to objects around them and behave like they would in real life. This configuration significantly affects performance. It should only be enabled if your PC supports a good frame rate in the game, and it will only be enabled by default with the...
Don't put this on your computer if you're already struggling with graphics, because it's only going to make it worse. It's not worth it.
High and ultra settings.
Alright, this is what everybody's been waiting for.
Last but not least, the Italian tank destroyers. Get ready for a unique branch of TDs featuring armor, turrets, and very interesting guns. Their characteristics are still being tested and may change, but it's already clear.
They won't change. I mean, sometimes they change a little bit, but you can pretty much make an opinion off of the statistics they're going to show here. It's almost guaranteed.
That these vehicles have real character. The Tier 5 and Tier 6 vehicles.
Okay. Don't get the Tier 6 if you're planning on getting another tank for Tier 6 skirmishes. I can already tell you right now, casemate tank destroyers have no place in Tier 6 skirmishes, in my opinion. The only time we bring TDs is if they're turreted. This tank just isn't going to be anything really special. It doesn't have any of the features that this line has, and it's not going to benefit in any way. It's just, don't get it for Tier 6 skirmishes. If you do end up playing it in Tier 6s, it'll probably just be because the caller wanted you to bring it, or is allowing you to bring it so you can grind your way up the line.
Vehicles are classic tank destroyers that hark back to the German roots of the Italian
It's just going to be like a Stug.
tank industry. Tier 7 is where the special treats of the line truly start to emerge. These vehicles have turrets with limited traverse angles and excellent gun elevation and depression angles.
So that 10 degrees from Tier 7 carries on through the whole line, and this is huge.
Their impressive armor allows them to really show off their full potential. The tanks also have a very unusual magazine, with long reloading times for each shell, but speedy reloading for the whole magazine. You're faced with a hybrid of a magazine and cyclical firing. However, further down the line, the vehicle's boosted armor transforms them.
Alright, Tier 8. Will this tank be a Tier 8 skirmish vehicle? Looking at the armor right here, this is impressive. Lower plate at 203. This is really good still. I know it shows green on there, whatever. It's all relative. I mean, when you're comparing 400 millimeters of armor on the ends of the cheek, obviously the lower plate's going to look weak. However, that's going to be difficult to go through. 300, what is this, maybe 250 on the front? I mean, look how much of the turret, or look how much of the front is taken up by the turret. It's about almost 50%. And this turret is strong. You're not going through this thing, not without premium. It's just, I mean, you need 250 millimeters of premium to be going through this. So, or of pen. And you're not going to get 250 on any heavy tank. And that's sort of what this vehicle is, but we'll go through it in a second.
into full-fledged assault TDs. In addition to its impressive armor, the Tier 8 vehicle has a sloped turret ring that allows it to keep a low...
Okay. This right here is why I don't think this is a Tier 8 skirmish tank. 3 shells, 7 seconds inner clip, 1200 damage. This means it's going to take 14 seconds to dish out 1200. It's also fairly slow, and it doesn't have great accuracy. Now, how are Tier 8 skirmishes usually played? A lot of the times it's using autoloaders, right? Because with 10 tanks on each team, speed is going to be your friend, and just maximizing your damage output in terms of burst damage is crucial. So often when I call Tier 8s, it's just autoloaders. Give me Barasks, Progettos, Lorraines, anything that can give or can output the most damage the quickest. So what that does is that even though you're all going to be reloading, if you've killed 3 vehicles, you will be able to absorb the other damage with your hit points. Or you're able to bail out. This tank is a heavy support vehicle. It is not a burst tank. And I can't stress that enough. I know it says autoloader, and it sort of is, but like they said, it sort of isn't. 1300 hit points, it's not, it's good, but it's nothing special. I mean, a defender has 1500, and it doesn't have this same sort of weird setup here. The pen is okay, the accuracy isn't great. Now, this tank is not going to snipe. However, with .42 accuracy, you can hit tanks in the open. That's not a problem. And I know that's going to scare a lot of people, but these tanks are not there to be sniping. I don't think this is a competitive vehicle for Tier 8. I think it'll be great in random battles, don't get me wrong. The 25-second reload isn't going to be bad at all. It looks like you'll just play your ridgeline, get your damage, and then kind of sit back, wait for you reload or relocate. It won't feel too bad to press that Charlie key and reload if you only have 1 shell left. Unlike other vehicles such as, I don't know, the 50B at Tier 10, where then you gotta reload for 28, 29 seconds. But moving on.
Profile and lower its gun just as well when traversing the turret.
Yep.
At Tier 9, this feature is even more striking. Here, the turret occupies the majority of the frontal projection, which will come in handy when utilizing gun elevation and depression angles. The 127mm gun continues the magazine tradition. The Contracaro 1 Mark II will both prepare you for Tier 10 and quickly become one of the top vehicles in your garage. And at the end of the labyrinth.
Alright. The big question is, should you get this vehicle for competitive play? Clan Wars advances.
The Minotaur awaits. A large and sturdy turret.
Alright, let's look at the armor here. We're going to go over everything. 225 lower plate. If your lower plate shouldn't be exposed, this is a hull-down vehicle. It has 10 degrees of gun depression. We don't even need to worry about that. Do we look at the Chieftain's lower plate? No, because it's going hull down. Who cares? Whatever. It's strong regardless. The turret takes up a huge portion of the tank here, which is great. I mean, let's look at the armor values here. They're all looking up in the 375, almost 400 millimeters. I mean, this is insane. The top of these so-called quote-unquote weak points, they're big. But they're 350 millimeters thick. They're no less than 330. And if you want to even push it and say they're 300, well, I mean, they're more. We can see it right here. They're above 337 millimeters thick. So that means that you're going to have to be firing heat at these. And even then, it's going to be a 50-50 whether it goes through. The Object 268 has 395 pen. The 277 has 330 heat pen. I don't think it has more than that. I believe it's 330. Those tanks are going to struggle to go through this cupola. And that's if they hit it. I mean, it's big, but you've got a huge other chunk of the turret here. And with 10 degrees of gun depression, again, I can't really show you on here, but those weak points may hide themselves a little bit. It looks like they're on the top, but they're also sloped backward. The hull is fantastic. Again, the hull looks to be the exact same thickness of the as the turret. And it doesn't look like this area up here is modeled, where it doesn't look like there's anything behind all these little viewports. But let's keep going. Outrageous armor.
Sloped armor, 10 degrees of gun depression,
10 degrees?
and an arc of fire covering 90 degrees.
Okay. 90 degrees to the left and right. Now, this, for almost every situation, is a fully traversable turret. If you have to move all the way to the left or the right, that's fine, because if you had to go all the way back over 180, it's the same as if you were going behind the tank. If you're shooting over the rear of your tank, there's already an issue with where you are, especially if you're in this vehicle. Often that means you're in a push, right? You push past that first vehicle, but you're still focused on that first vehicle, so that the turret's starting to drift over your engine deck. This is not a pushing vehicle in most scenarios. However, I'll explain why it can push later on. But the only time this is going to be a problem is if this tank is left by itself to its own devices and it gets pushed. It's going to run into the same problem that the T-28 prototype has. The T-28, I believe, is 270 degrees, which means there's just a 90-degree area behind the vehicle that it can't put its turret over. Now, what that means is that if tanks start coming around behind you, most tanks can continue to turn their tracks and the turret at the same time. This tank will only be able to do that for 90 degrees, and then it won't be effective anymore. And what that means is that even heavies are going to be able to outcircle you. So what this tank needs to do is if it thinks it's going to get pushed, it needs to get up against the red line or up against a building. Because if it's not up against something, it's going to get its ass kicked. It just is. So this tank needs to be supported, or it needs to be in a place where it can back up against a wall and prevent itself from being circled. Now, let's just keep going because there's more.
Within a 5-shell magazine dealing 530 HP of damage each, the entire magazine may reload very quickly, but the individual shells take a long time.
How long?
Think of it as a regular gun with an incredibly quick reloading time. But
here we go. So this is the same thing. A lot of people have seen these stats already. We'll go over these one at a time, and I'll tell you where I stand on this vehicle. 5 shells, 8 seconds, 24-second reload time. Forget this. Just assume it's an 8-second reload time because that's nothing. That's just the time to reload 3 shells. If this was a regular autoloader with maybe 4 seconds, this would be double. So I'm perfectly fine with 8 seconds. Aim time, 2.3. Well, yeah, 2.3 seconds. Not bad. When you're running food on this vehicle, as you will be if you're playing competitively, and with Brothers in Arms, and maybe even Vents, and I'll explain that one in a second, you could be able to get that down to 2 seconds maybe. It shouldn't matter anyway because this tank doesn't suffer from the reload time interclip problem where the shells reload faster than it aims, forcing you to either rush your shots or lower your DPM. Average damage of 530. This is fantastic. So this means that this tank has an output of 2,650 damage, if my math is correct. It hits for 40 more damage than a 277 with an 8-second reload. And that's what I'm comparing against. The 277 IS-7 hit for 490, this thing hits for 530. This means that this tank will be able to finish off one-hits that those two heavy tanks can't. Again, the Chieftain hits for 440. This thing hits for, I don't know, maybe it's 20% more. And this means that a lot of those tanks that we previously had to bring a 907 to clean up, this tank can finish in one hit. DPM, not bad at all. And again, this is base, 2,839. We can probably push this close to 3,100. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to 32. You can't run a gun rammer. You may only be able to get to 3,000. Average pen, not bad, 255. I expect that this thing will have about 330 pen, would be my guess, similar to other tanks of its class. The big question is does it have heat or does it have APCR? Now, the reasoning for that is this tank has 0.44 accuracy, and that's going to scare people. However, I'm not that concerned. A lot of my IS-7 has 0.37 accuracy, I believe. And while it's not great, a lot of the times I'm shooting on the move. Now, it's not a KV-2, so it doesn't have like 0.64 or whatever the KV-2 has. This tank, like I spoke about with the tier 8 earlier, is going to be able to hit tanks out in the open. It's not a problem. It's not going to be sniping if its life depended on it. It just won't. So this is why having an autoloader actually works out so well for the vehicle. Because if it had a regular, if it didn't have a magazine, you would pretty much have to run a gun rammer on it to improve that DPM. However, since you can't run a gun rammer, that opens up another piece of equipment. So I'm going to be running vents and turbo. The vents will improve the reload. The turbo is going to help this 36 km/h top speed. That should bring it up to 40 and help the power to weight ratio. Now this, I don't know what the ground resistances are, but this looks like a 60 TP. So a quicker sort of super heavy vehicle. I mean, we saw that armor layout. This turret is arguably, I don't know if it's better than 60 TP. It's not quite as rounded, but that armor is very thick, and not much is going to be going through that turret. It also has 10 degrees of gun depression to the 60 TP's 8, so it's going to make it much more flexible on the ridgeline. So my thought is let's bring improved aiming on this. At least I will personally. I'm not saying what you should run on it. We're going to all have to experiment. That should bring it down to maybe 0.42 with vents, 0.41 with food, maybe even 0.4. I don't fully know what the improved modifications you could put on it, or the field mods. I think there is one where you can improve aiming, maybe at the price, or accuracy at the price of aim time. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not too familiar with field mods yet. So there's plenty of ways. I'm sure we can get this below 0.4. And if you got that down to 0.4, anything below 0.4, 0.39, that would be a big win for this vehicle, because this is where it's suffering. Forget the mobility. You're going to have to suffer something to get that kind of armor, and honestly I was expecting it to be like 32 km/h. Hit points, 2100. I have no problems with 2100 hit points. The Chieftain has 2200, and while a lot of people run, the hit point buff on it, that equipment, this tank won't need it. It's sitting behind a ridgeline, and it's going to be blocking a ton of damage. Should you get this vehicle? I was wrong about the M5Y. However, this thing does quite well in areas that the M5Y lacked. Now, the reason the M5Y was not the Chieftain replacement, which I explained in a previous video, was for a bunch of reasons. One is the stupid jelly bean turret that the thing had. I mean, the turret would stick up everywhere. I mean, you'd put your gun down, the turret would just go flying up, and it would stick out from behind buildings and just get penned, and what a mess. The other problem it had was that while it was hold down, the two turret support things were weak points. I mean, they only had about 200 millimeters of armor, and you could just go right through the thing. It also had an ammunition problem. It ran APCR and heat, so it suffered from a similar issue that the 140 had, however in a heavy. The tank hit for 360 damage, but it had APCR, which had great shell velocity and mediocre pen, but it also had heat, which had great pen but terrible shell velocity, and can't go through spaced armor. So what this made you do is you had to fire standard most of the game, similar to what you do in a 140. And there's not much wrong with that, except for that when you're in a heavy tank and you only hit for 360 and you're trying to trade on a ridgeline, but you also have weak points, and your jelly bean turret swinging around, it means that you start losing hit points really quickly. This tank, again, I don't know if it has APCR or heat. It's a blessing and a curse both ways. If it has APCR, you're going to be able to go through the sides of vehicles much better, but you're going to lose that shell penetration over time. It's good because if you're shooting at the sides of vehicles with APCR, that 0.4 accuracy, especially against tanks that have side skirts like the 277 and the Chieftain, isn't going to be troublesome, because you should be able to go through it. APCR has no problem with spaced armor, at least side plates, small plates like that. However, with heat, and you're shooting at the front of vehicles, for the most part, there isn't much spaced armor on the front of any tier 10 vehicles, other than the turrets, like the Super Conqueror. And what that means is that shooting at the front of vehicles, you shouldn't have any issue going through just front hulls, depending on how much penetration it has. I expect this vehicle to have heat, given that it has 530. But that means the front of vehicles, you'll be able to shoot right down. Again, you're going to be on a ridge line, so you should be able to shoot right down into those frontal plates or up into lower plates, and you won't have any problems penning. So it works both ways. But it hits for 530, so you don't need to poke up as often like the M5Y, which had a 6-second reload time, so you constantly had to poke up, come down, poke up, go down. Just risking your hit points quite a bit. Now, how do I believe this vehicle will be played? It's going to be a heavy support vehicle. So let's imagine we have proc. Often you stick a Sturv up in that top line and it can sort of farm tanks as they come down. The problem with the Sturv is that then it can't act as a heavy if it needs to. This tank can, and I understand that it only has 90 degrees to the left and right, but often a push is going to last more than 30 seconds, which is how long this tank, or 34 seconds, which is how long this tank takes to dump all 5 of its shells. Remember, you have 8 times 5 minus 1 because it doesn't cost anything, so 8 times 5 is 40, 32 seconds. You should be able to dump out that whole clip, which is backshot level clip potential, in 32 seconds, which sounds like a lot, but you have a ton of armor. People are going to have to be shooting your lower plate here when you're pushing. You have no real weak points. I mean, look at the mess of this armor layout. Now that you can really see it, it's all sloped everywhere. So this tank can come down and it can push. It's also going to absolutely eat up anything that pushes straight into it. The 140, I believe my 140 maybe has a 5.4. It might be 6-second reload. This thing has 8. 8 seconds is short. It really is. It's going to give you that time to zoom out, reassess the situation, find the low health tank, zoom back in, aim in, and then fire. So while that may look like a long interclip reload, it's actually helping you out in terms of a long range push where you have a lot of vision and you can see the enemies coming. Similar to proc. This tank will be able to dump that whole clip out, no problem, and then because of the 24-second reload, do a little bit of repositioning, just back down. It doesn't have, like the Foch 155, which has a lower clip potential and worse armor, a 60-second reload, where then whoever's playing it is flipping out because now they're trying to figure out how they're going to get out of there. In a push, in competitive play, it's more important to systematically just take out one vehicle at a time, reassess another vehicle, rather than just bursting out all over the place, which is what the Foch says. Oh, that tank's gone, I'm just going to start shooting something else. Oh, I can't see that one anymore, it's not right in front of me. I don't want to have to move my gun arc because my gun only moves 20 degrees to the left and the right, and I'm just going to start shooting something else instead. This tank really gives you the time to assess that situation between your shots, similar to you would in a medium. Alright, I realize that was a little bit passionate. Now, ultimate question, do you get this tank? Yes? Cautiously, because I could be wrong again. Remember, this is all paper, and I didn't realize the problems that the M5Y would have. Maybe these weak points are too much. We won't be bringing more than 2 of these in most games. We really won't. I see this being more of a specialty vehicle, but I do think it may have a place in competitive play, just because that turret is impossible and because of that high alpha or high magazine potential at 2650, which I believe is actually the highest in the game. The Foch should be right behind it with 2400. And just that 530 alpha, which is just so nice. I mean, the 2684 has 650, only 120 more. But I digress, because this video is really rambling on, and it's my second time recording it. Let's just finish the video, and then we'll do a quick summary.
Tolerable penalty of 24 seconds every 5 shots. And to spice it all up, great penetration. The Conte.
Alright, this looks like a smaller vehicle. You can see it's quite elongated, but it looks quite flat. And just look at how much, just the whole tank is the turret. This looks quite flat too, so I don't know what the effective is going to be on that. Same with this turret. It's not quite sloped back as much, but, I mean, that would just be absurd. The turret is mounted right on the front. It's just one big plate. You can see how this tank's able to work the ridgeline, and, I mean, let's just finish.
Arrow 3 Minotauro can provide impressive fire support, or it can lead the attack and break through enemy defenses with its strong head. The bull lowers its horns, stomps the ground with its hoof,
a little bit
and
dramatic.
The enemy better step aside. You can test this vehicle and all the other changes during the common test. Subscribe to stay up to date on all World of Tanks news, and good luck on the test battlefield.
Alright. Final summary here. Map changes. There's a lot of interesting changes here, a lot of which affect competitive play. But all we can do is speculate as to how they will affect advances in Clan Wars. That's something we'll have to test out. Obviously, I've gone over my ideas and my questions about them. Recon. It can't hurt to play it. It really can't. I think it's worth playing, but that's up to you. Track mechanics, very cool. No implications. If you have a computer, not a bad computer, I should say, because my computer isn't that great. If you have a computer that can't handle what you already have or it's struggling, just don't do that, because all that's going to do is make your frame rate lower, and then you're going to have a worse time. Finally, cautiously get the Minotaur. Be careful, because we may call for it, and then it's going to fall off a cliff like the M5Y, and then we won't ever see it again in advances. So that's it for me. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to respond to comments, TeamSpeak, in-game, whatever. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.